Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the NALEO Educational Fund's presentation of Redistricting for California's Future. This is part of the NALEO Educational Fund's program of Latinos Draw the Lines. My name is Arturo Vargas. I am the Chief Executive Officer of NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Educational Fund. Many of you are very familiar with our organization and the work that we do. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization headquartered in Los Angeles with a national focus, but we do a great deal of work here in the state of California. And we devote ourselves to promoting the full participation of Latinos in the American political process. I know many of you worked with us in promoting a fair and accurate count in the 2020 census. In fact, the census is one of the major policy and outreach issues for us at NALEO, because it is so central to the foundation of our democracy. Well, what comes from doing the census is population data, and putting those population data to work is what we're here to talk about now, the next step in that continuum with regard to political participation, and that is redistricting. Probably the most intense political process that exists in our democracy. The drawing of electoral districts so that voters can choose their representatives. Now at NALEO and throughout my career, we've all come to understand that redistricting can be used as a powerful tool to ensure fair representation, but also as a tool to hinder and diminish the voice of certain population groups. And Latinos have been subject to that kind of unfair discriminatory treatment in voting rights by unfair redistricting lines. So we want to make sure that in this process of 2021, as the state begins anew to draw congressional legislative lines, that these lines will be fair and give Latinos and all Californians an opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. And so we will go through a fairly detailed presentation today on what the redistricting process is. Here in California, the voters instituted a Citizens Independent Commission to draw the lines. This will be the second cycle in which this commission draws the lines. And we are delighted and honored to be joined by 3 of the 14 commissioners who are serving the state of California in this process. Now, let me first say off the bat that the commissioners are here only to introduce themselves, so that you all know who they are. They cannot receive any information from you or any kind of testimony or data about lines you would like to see in your communities. There will be another time for that when the commission holds hearings. You can't do that at this session. This is only an opportunity for them to say hello and introduce themselves. I also want to once again underscore our appreciation to them for the service that they're giving to the state of California. I myself am a veteran of a number of redistricting battles with scars to show for it. And so I know how time-consuming, difficult, and intense a process can be. And we're delighted that the 3 of them are joining us today for this conversation. So let me introduce them. We have Alicia Fernandez. Commissioner Fernandez is from Yolo County. Her background is Mexican-American. She's a former board president of the River Delta Unified School District, and she has more than 30 years of experience working with the state of California on investigations, financial, and program management and fiscal services. We're also joined by Commissioner Patricia Sinai, who lives in San Diego. She was born in Mexico and has nearly 30 years of community experience in building communities, and has been a former member of NALEO and is a good friend of the organization. We're proud to see her serve in this leadership role for the state. And we're also joined by Angela Vazquez, who is a resident here of LA County, a native of the Inland Empire. She has 9 years of education and child welfare public policy experience, and is currently a policy director at the Children's Partnership. So let me now ask our 3 commissioners, our 3 guests, if they could please provide us some opening remarks. And we'll start with Commissioner Fernandez. Commissioner Fernandez, if you could turn on your camera and unmute. There you were.
Sorry about that. I was having a few difficulties. But thank you, CEO Vargas, and thank you, Naleo, for inviting us to participate in your redistricting webinar. As you mentioned, I'm Alicia Fernandez, one of the 14 commissioners appointed to the 2020 California Citizens Redistricting Commission, charged with redrawing the electoral districts in California after receipt of the census data. I'm a first-generation Californian of parents that migrated from Mexico many, many years ago. And as such, English is my second language. My father was a farm laborer his entire life. And as such, all 8 of his children also work for the same farmer. I'm from a small farming community in northern Yolo County. We're just 8 miles outside of Sacramento. And although I do enjoy traveling quite a bit, I haven't lived any further than 30 miles from that community. So I stick close to home. I recently retired from state government after working over 30 years, as you mentioned. The first half of my career was in the business finance area, which was aligned closely with my degrees in finance. And the second half of my career was in law enforcement. I've always been involved in my community with a passion for education, specifically the issue of equity in education. I was a founding member of the first charter school in Yolo County, which was successfully opened after the school board voted to close down our elementary school, which was 50% Latino. As such, I ran for the school board, a true grassroots effort, as we canvassed all communities due to the trustees' areas being classified as at large. I was successful and stayed on the school board for 14 more years until I recently resigned once I was appointed to this commission. But immediately after I left the school board, my son followed in my footsteps and successfully won the seat on the board to continue to advocate for our people. In terms of serving on the commission, I saw this as an opportunity to continue to give back to beyond my small bubble, as I like to call it. I'm very proud of my Mexican culture, and I'm appreciative of my parents ensuring we visited often and continue to maintain our ties to this day. However, as a first-generation Californian, I have seen and lived the struggles of immigrants, not having time to get involved with anything beyond surviving and providing for your family, as well as distrust in government. As a commissioner, I'm hopeful my background and experiences will help build trust with my fellow Californians so they feel heard and moved to participate in this process, because I really am wanting to know what their communities are. I am blessed to be part of this nonpartisan effort to redraw the districts, and I look forward to connecting with Californians throughout the state. Californians voted to have an independent process, and I personally feel it's my civic responsibility to participate. Our goal is to have as many participate in this process, as each voice needs to be heard, because these districts will be in place for the next 10 years. People need to feel that their voices are heard and they have had a part in helping us redraw the boundaries. The best part of our process is that there are no requirements to participate. Anyone can provide input in the redistricting process. As a member of a community, you don't even need to tell us who you are. Anyone can participate regardless of citizenship, immigration status, or geographic location. What I find exciting about my role is being able to make an impact by involving Californians throughout the state, being able to connect with many communities, and becoming more familiar with my own state. I believe the best is yet to come, and I'm looking forward to it. And I will now turn it over to my fellow commissioner, Patricia Senay.
Buenas tardes. Thank you so much for inviting us today. It's definitely an honor and a privilege to be here, as well as be part of the commission. My journey on being part of the commission's, or how I got here, was in 2nd or 3rd grade when I lived in Irvine. I had a teacher who just really encouraged us to be all that we can be, and this was in the 70s. And I ran home, according to the folklore in my family, I don't know the details, saying that I was going to be the first woman president in the United States. And my mom did not know if to embrace that or not, because the truth, or to tell me, you know, that I couldn't do that. The truth was, I was an immigrant from Mexico, and I couldn't be a president in Mexico either, because my mother was an immigrant from Peru. My dad was an immigrant from Argentina. And so I guess I went back and figured out that what I could do was become Secretary of State. I have, my whole career, I have worked to promote and bring in as many people as possible into the civic process, be it in Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, or the United States. I have had an opportunity to work in San Francisco in the Bay Area, where I was a program officer I was a fellow with the San Francisco Foundation. And then later I moved down to San Diego, where I worked on civic engagement efforts there. I've served on a local school board, and sometimes I find it more comfortable being in the background and being a facilitator and promoting others to get involved. And other times I feel like, hey, I've got to step up, because if I don't, who will? My passion is all who are in the community, and I'm very excited to be part of the commission. And with that, I am going to pass it on to my colleague and friend now, Commissioner Angela Vazquez.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Naleo for hosting this important event and everyone here who has joined us. My name is Angela Vazquez, and I am a Californian, a Chicana, and the granddaughter of Mexican immigrants. A little bit of my family's history is I believe we honor our ancestors' journeys by weaving their narrative into our own. Immigrant communities intimately know that borders, lines, maps, boundaries are powerful and important. My dad's family has been in the Central Valley since before the Mexican-American War. The border crossed us like it did so many of us. My mom's family came here with her dad as the first to arrive ahead of the family, walking in disintegrating leather shoes across the desert of Palm Springs, having made the journey from Michoacan with nothing but a canteen and a traveling companion. Most of my known family history is in California, and it's here where I really draw inspiration for my work as an advocate and an organizer across the state. I'm a social worker by training, and have spent nearly a decade in children's advocacy. My parents are educators, and we as a family were taught early that to engage with public systems meant that you keep your head down and do the work. This may resonate with many of you. My parents, both born in the States, experienced tremendous amounts of discrimination, particularly in school. My dad never learned Spanish because my grandmother didn't want him to have an accent. My family wasn't especially politically active, excepting my dad's dad, my grandfather, who I'm proud and honored to say marched with Cesar Chavez in the Central Valley, where my grandfather was a farm worker working in the grape fields. Reflecting on my own political journey, I realized that it's not that my grandfather and I are anomalies in our family's story. It was that there was a policy issue that was deeply personal and relevant to us. And there were community leaders present and focused on building power amongst each other. For me, I'm a trauma survivor and have built a career advocating with and on behalf of children and young people with their own stories of trauma and resilience. I see a similar story for Latinx and immigrant communities across California. We must make the case for redistricting to be about building community power for issues that are deeply personal and relevant. Communities of interest is an abstract concept, but being able to vote for an elected official who will finally shut down that toxic battery factory in your backyards and make them pay for cleanup, that's personal and powerful. I look forward to building power with our communities to ensure this process reflects the diverse communities, interests, and stories of all Californians. And I'll close with a quote, one of my favorites. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together. Lila Watson.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Vazquez, Commissioner Sinai, and Commissioner Fernandez. I think all of you will agree that we have three extraordinary leaders serving on the commission from our community, and we're very fortunate to have them there. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Rosalind Gold, who is the Chief Policy Officer at the Naleo Educational Fund. I've been at the organization 26 years, but she predates me. She's been with Naleo Educational Fund going on 31 years and has emerged as one of the nation's premier experts on political engagement issues, including redistricting. So let me ask Rosalind to proceed with her presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Arturo, and thank you so much again, Commissioners Fernandez, Sinai, and Vazquez, for your tireless and inspirational work on behalf of all Californians. And I also want to thank all of you for joining us for this webinar to talk about one of the most critical issues facing California, which is how can we ensure that we achieve fair representation for Latinos and all Californians through the redistricting process. And before I get started, I would like to ask that if you have any questions, there is a question and answer box, and that you should please feel free to use that question and answer box to pose any questions, and we will indeed answer those questions at a period during the webinar. Great. Well, thank you again. You know, when we think about California, California is comprised of 40% Latinos in its population. So for the California to be prosperous, for the well-being of all Californians, Latinos have to have the ability to elect representatives who are accountable and responsive to their issues. And the lines that get drawn during the redistricting process, they are going to determine the contours of our representative democracy for the next 10 years. So given that, and given that our mission at the NALEO Educational Fund, as Arturo mentioned, is to facilitate full Latino participation in the American political process, then redistricting is one of our top priorities for our organization. In my presentation, I'm first going to touch on why redistricting is important for the Latino community, and also what is the role of the California Redistricting Commission, and that's going to include what are the criteria for the maps that the commission draws and what the timeline is going to look like. And then we'll end up talking about how community members can be involved in California's redistricting process. So I wanted to start with just a very basics discussion of the kind of fundamentals of redistricting. And you can see that I have a chart here that is kind of a very simple graphic of a jurisdiction. It could be a city, it could be a county. And you can see that all of the districts have the same number of residents. And we use data from the census, and in this case, it'll be Census 2020, to help us determine how to draw districts that have the same number of residents. Because under the US Constitution, to have fair representation, there must be roughly equal population in every single district. Well, over time, districts become uneven in size. People move around, there's population changes. So since we last redistricted about 10 years ago, we now no longer have California districts that are roughly equal in size. And that's why we have to draw the lines again to make the districts equal. And, you know, as Arturo mentioned, we use census data to draw the lines. So any of you who work to promote a fair and accurate count of the Latino community, you actually got a head start on redistricting. So you're already on the path to work with us on redistricting. Well, how the lines are drawn are also very critical to determining if different population groups can elect the candidates of their choice and have a say in the outcome of elections. And here again, I have kind of a simplified graphic where you have maybe a city or a county or a jurisdiction that has 4 residents each. But the way the district lines are drawn here, there's only 1 Latina in each of the 4 districts. And with that composition, with Latinas only making up 1/4 of the overall population in the district, they are really not going to have a fair opportunity or an effective opportunity to elect or choose representatives who are accountable to their concerns, who will address their needs and their issues. But look what happens if you draw the district lines differently. You still have 4 districts, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, but you have one district where Latinas are 3/4 of the district. And in this district now, you really have much more of an opportunity for Latinas to choose and elect representatives who are going to be accountable. And even though I've used Latinas in this example can be used for any group that's underrepresented, any group that suffered discrimination. Again, how we draw those district lines really makes a difference for underrepresented communities to be able to choose accountable representatives. So, as Arturo had mentioned, before the last redistricting in 2011, California had conducted its redistricting through the state legislature. The state legislature drew the lines for congressional maps and state legislative maps. And the California voters enacted the Voters First Act to take that responsibility from the legislature and put it in the hands of the California's Citizens Redistricting Commission, an independent redistricting commission. So the California Citizens Redistricting Commission has to draw maps for, first of all, the US House of Representative districts. And the reason I'm saying approximately 53 districts is that one of the other things we're going to be seeing from Census 2020 data is data for apportionment, data that'll determine how many members of the House of Representatives each state gets. So we're not sure, but California may lose a seat, California may lose 2 seats. We're not sure exactly how many districts California will have until we see that census apportionment data, which we're expecting right now about April 30th. The California Redistricting Commission also draws lines for the 40 state Senate districts and the 80 state assembly districts and the 4 state Board of Equalization districts. And we have 14 redistricting commissioners, 14 members. They are very diverse in terms of what parts of the state they come from, what population groups they come from. It is a commission that not only has Democrats and Republicans on it, but also commissioners who are not affiliated with either of those two political parties. So these are the people who will be making the decisions about drawing the lines for California. I then wanted to talk about what are the criteria that the commissioners are going to be using for drawing the district maps? Well, the California State Constitution lays those criteria out. And when it lays the criteria out, it does it in order of priority. It's very specific to say, these are the top priorities, and then these are the priorities that are less important. So first of all, the highest priority is that districts generally have to be equal in population. Again, that's to comply with the US Constitution to ensure fair representation. Districts must also comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which has been a very powerful tool that protects Latinos and other underrepresented groups from discrimination. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Federal Voting Rights Act and compliance in a little bit. Districts also have to have contiguity. In other words, all parts of the district have to be connected. So for example, you can't have a district where one part of the population is on one side of a really tall mountain range that nobody can get over or get around, and the other part of the district is on the other side of the mountain range. Again, all parts of the district have to be connected. Another priority is that we have to respect localities, neighborhoods, and communities of interest, their geographic integrity. And I'll be again talking more about communities of interest in this criteria, because these are the building blocks of district maps. And this is where a lot of the work we're going to do with the community and the community input that the commission needs will be around communities of interest. Districts also have to be geographically compact. The population of the district cannot be too much dispersed too widely. And finally, where practicable, there has to be nesting. So for example, each Senate district has to be comprised of 2 adjacent assembly districts, and each Board of Equalization district has to be comprised of 10 complete and adjacent Senate districts. But again, just as a reminder, these are in order of priority. So if districts have to be drawn to comply with the Voting Rights Act or the US Constitution, but they are not perfectly compact or perfectly nested, the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act are a higher priority than the other criteria. So I did want to talk more about the Voting Rights Act. The Federal Voting Rights Act has been a powerful law that prevents discrimination in election and voting practices against Latinos and other underrepresented communities of color. And in the redistricting context, the Voting Rights Act has been used to prevent redistrictings or to challenge redistrictings that deprive the Latino community of a meaningful opportunity to choose the candidates of their choice. And there's been 2 very notable cases involving the use of the Voting Rights Act in California that have helped the Latino community. First of all, in Los Angeles County, in a decision in 1991, the court found that the Board of Supervisors of LA County had historically and consistently discriminated against Latinos in drawing district lines for the Board of Supervisors. They had intentionally broken up the Latino community into several different districts to prevent Latinos from electing their candidates. Because of the redistricting that resulted after that decision in 1991, we saw the first Latina elected to the LA County Board of Supervisors. That was Supervisor Gloria Molina. And more recently, in Kern County, a court found that the redistricting there, again, divided the Latino community in a way that didn't provide Latinos an opportunity to choose their elected representatives with the maps that had been proposed, and that a new map was drawn that kept the Latino community together in a way that provided them with fairer representation. So the Voting Rights Act is something that we're going to be really watching about during the redistricting process because it is so important to protect the Latino community. And a Voting Rights Act compliance is really determined by a very complex combination of demographic, geographic, voting, and historical data and factors. But it's very important that our maps comply. I then wanted to talk about communities of interest, because again, one of the criteria is that district lines respect communities of interest. And a way to think about communities of interest is that they're basically the building blocks of districts. They're a neighborhood, a community, a group of people who have similar common policy concerns and who would benefit from being together in a single district. And communities of interest can be defined in a lot of different ways. They can be defined as a group of people in a neighborhood or an area who have shared ancestry or shared history or shared language. People who use the same transit lines might be a community of interest. People who live by a particular geographic feature, like at the foothills of mountains or in a particular valley or a particular rural area, can be a community of interest. People who celebrate the same cultural events or go to the same cultural centers, that's one thing that unites communities. You know, for Latinos, we know that many of our communities and neighborhoods share similar education concerns or similar health policy concerns. And so community members who come to together to advocate for neighborhood issues, that can be a community of interest as well. And I'm a native of Los Angeles, so I like to say and suggest that perhaps loyal Dodger fans in my area might be a community of interest. Now, I have to apologize to those of you who are Giants fans or Padres fans or Oakland Athletics fans, but you can also articulate your own communities of interest around your baseball loyalties. Okay. So there are also requirements that say, you know what, when we talk about the maps and think about the maps that are going to be drawn, they cannot be drawn in certain ways that might create undue partisan or political influence. So, for example, communities of interest don't include relationships with political parties or relationships with incumbents or political candidates. The commission cannot consider the place of residence of an incumbent or political candidate when they're creating maps. And the maps can't be drawn to favor or discriminate against any particular candidate, any particular elected official, or any particular political party. Now, if you're an elected official, you might wonder, well, can I participate in the redistricting process or promote participation in the redistricting process at all? Well, yes, you can do that, but you can't do it in a way that violates these prohibitions against partisan or political influence. So, for example, elected officials can educate community members about the importance of redistricting and the redistricting process. You can inform community members about hearings and opportunities to participate. But here's an example of something that would not be constructive for an elected official or community group to do, which is to come before the commission and say, hey, we're all loyal Democrats, or we're all loyal Republicans, and we're a community of interest because we really support this particular candidate, or we really support this city council member or this school board member. That's not a constructive or permissible way to talk about your communities of interest. Well, we are going to work with the Latino community to help the commission learn about communities of interest. We're going to be mobilizing Latinos throughout the state so that people can share with the commission what they believe their communities of interest are. And people can do that through personal testimony. They can do it through written descriptions. They can write out the boundaries or just describe a geographic area and describe why that is a community of interest. They can submit boundary lines or a map of a community interest. Now, there will be an online community of interest platform that'll be available to community members, but that is not the only way that people will be able to submit testimony and maps. There'll be a lot of different ways that people will be able to provide the commission with input about their communities of interest. So really, the bottom line about communities of interest is that local community members define their communities of interest. As the commissioners were mentioning, this is why this is one of the most democratic ways for people to participate, because community members tell their own stories about what makes their neighborhood, what makes their region, what makes their area unique, and why they should be kept together in the same district. So I now want to talk about the timeline and the steps that are involved in the commission's redistricting process. And before I go into the timeline, I have to note that we just learned from the Census Bureau that the data that the Redistricting Commission needs to draw the maps for all Californians, that data will not reach us and not be delivered until September 30th. And typically, and under federal law, that data would have been available by the end of March. But the Census Bureau has experienced some challenges because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there have been some other issues with the work on the redistricting data. So again, we're going to be getting that data about 6 months later than we might have typically gotten it in a decennial redistricting commission. So because of that, and we just learned this, there is a lot of questions that we're grappling with and are open, and some uncertainties about the timeline. But this is how we understand the commission to envision the timeline. First of all, between February and May, the commission will be working with partners to do education presentations like this one. Between June and September, it's envisioned that there will be public input meetings. And these are the meetings where the commissioners gather input, gather testimony about communities of interest. The census data will then get to California by September 30th, and then it will get to the commission, and the commission will start to do a line drawing. But also at the same time that the commission is doing line drawing, there'll be community groups and voting rights groups that'll be doing draft maps and submitting those maps to the commission. After that first round of maps are submitted to the commission will post its own first round of draft maps. There'll then be a period of public comment on the commission's draft maps, additional line drawing, and then the commission will approve and release final maps, and those final maps will go to California's Secretary of State. Well, I wanted to highlight some really important emerging issues that we're dealing with in the 2021 redistricting. So one of the challenges of the delay in the delivery of census data is it means that the commission is going to need several months to go through the process that I just went through, from when it gets the data to when it actually produces final maps. But if we also think about the other end of the timeline, what's going to happen in 2022, you have election officials who need approved district lines well in advance of the June 2022 primary. They need to know what those lines are for the maps that the commission is going to approve, because they have certain work they need to do before the primary. They need to do certain things with respect to precincting. They need to do certain things with respect to the process that candidates go through to qualify for, to be nominated, to be on the ballot. They have to send out sample ballots in advance of the primary. So all of that work has to be done before the June 2022 primary. But at the same time, you have the commission looking at the time it's going to need, through 2021 to get its work done. So we really understand that this is going to be a balancing act. There's a lot of uncertainty about how these different deadlines are going to play out right now. But we also appreciate the commitment of the commission to making sure that a new timeline does indeed leave sufficient time for public input on the draft maps that the commission puts together once the census data is released. And by the way, this is not only an issue for redistricting at the state level, for the state and congressional districts, it's also going to have an impact on all of the local redistricting, and a lot of which is being done simultaneously. The drawing of lines for cities, the drawing of lines for counties. We're going to see, or are seeing, a lot of jurisdictions right now rethinking their particular lines and how they deal with their deadlines. Another issue is the impact of the COVID pandemic, right? And we know that the pandemic is creating environment where many of us have to use Zoom or use virtual interactions to communicate with each other, right? Well, as we all know, from the infamous I am not a cat incident, Zoom is not a perfect way sometimes of hearing and listening to people, and also particularly for the Latino community. We know a lot of our communities don't have access to telecommunications technology, or may experience challenges for those of us who have to go out to organize the community and work with the community during the pandemic. So we learned a lot from our census organizing work, and we are hoping to use those lessons as we move forward with our redistricting work. So how can you partner with us on our redistricting efforts? Well, we are launching the Latino Draw the Lines campaign, and there's a lot of work you can do as we move forward to mobilize the Latino community to participate. You can receive and send out updates on the redistricting process. Let us know if you want to get those updates and forward them on. You can co-host a webinar on the basics of redistricting. You can do basic education with your community members. We talked about working to help Latino community members articulate and submit testimony on their communities of interest. You can co-host a community redistricting workshop or training that will help mobilize community members and prepare them to provide that testimony. And you can also participate in advocacy with the commission with regard to its draft maps or any other matters. And just one other activity we're going to be engaging in, California is a very diverse state, and we want to make sure that the lines that are drawn provide fair representation for all of our diverse communities. So we are going to also be working on a unity mapping effort where we're going to get together with partners in the Native American community, the Black community, the Asian Pacific Islander community, to see if we can come up with maps that really protect the voting rights and the electoral opportunities for all of those different groups. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. I hope we can work and continue to work together to help ensure that California's democracy is responsive and accountable to Latinos and to all Californians. Thank you so much, and I will be happy to take questions.
Good afternoon, Rosalind. We have some questions in the Q&A box that I will read to you. The first question, which is, how can the public be more involved in the process?
So if you are interested, you can work with community members and work with us to actually organize workshops or technical assistance where you educate community members about why redistricting is important, and then also educate them about what a community of interest is, so that they can then share their vision of their communities of interest with the commission. And as I had mentioned, there's a lot of different ways that people can provide that information to the commission, but the commissioners are really eager to hear from community members, because again, they're the ones who will be telling their stories. So if you are interested in either just doing basic education about redistricting or partnering with us on a workshop to help prepare people to provide that kind of information to the commission, please let us know.
The next question is very similar. What is exactly the action that we have to take to support redistricting?
So again, like I said, if you want, there's a lot of different ways you can support fair redistricting. Let us know if you want to co-host something like this webinar, basically to provide basic information, to educate people, hey, redistricting is here. This is why it's important. This is why census data was so important for redistricting. We just want you to be aware of what's going on. We want to let you know when the hearings are, when you're going to have opportunities, or again, if you want to engage in a more, in the field way, let us know about working together to help your community members to speak out about their communities of interest.
With that same note, can anyone participate, including people outside of California?
Well, since people, the commission is going to be listening to what Californians say are their communities of interest, people can talk about that, but, the commission is going to be weighing testimony and looking, and it's one of the things the commission is thinking about right now, which is how do you weigh the credibility of testimony? So if somebody provides input, but does not appear to be credible in terms of the knowledge of California's communities or community members, it may not have the same weight as testimony or input from community members who are clearly residents of the state.
The next question. I live in Fullerton, Orange County, and I'd like to know what we can do to achieve fair representation for Raza communities in my county, especially see how we've been able to express our political power in the last decade. Are we looking at state, federal, and county districts today?
Okay, so this webinar is basically about the work of California's Redistricting Commission, which is drawing the lines for congressional districts and for state legislative and Board of Equalization districts. And that's where we may work, NALEO may work in some localities, but that's really where the focus of our effort is going to be. You may want to reach out to find out who is working on county redistricting in your area. And, again, if you shoot us an email, shoot our colleagues an email, we'll provide that information for you. We can help connect you with the people who are working on county redistricting in Orange County.
Great. Any early indications on how many congressional seats California will be losing?
Well, we've looked at a couple of estimates, and the estimates range from California, the very optimistic estimate that California will not lose any, to more pessimistic estimates that California will lose 2 seats. So that's basically the range. But, again, we really need to wait to see what the Census 2020 data says.
Thank you. For underrepresented communities, packing a district seems like a good idea, but having just one representative might actually be a way to dilute power. So only one representative might care about certain issues and none of the others will. How can we prevent this?
Well, I think, first of all, again, if the district lines are drawn fairly, right, then it is up to the community to do organizing about electing candidates and organizing about who it is that they are going to support and who is going to be responsive to their needs. And I just do want to mention that we at NALEO, we don't work with communities on choosing or endorsing candidates or work with political parties. We don't do that. We just work on the lines being fair. And then it is up to community members and other people in the political world to organize people in a way to help them elect candidates who are responsive.
We have 6 more questions and they're incoming. The next one is, will this redistricting process replace the current CRVA districts that were put in place 3 years ago? If yes, do you expect this upcoming process to make major changes in our current election districts?
Okay, so, we really need to see the data. Okay, we have some data from a survey of the population called the American Community Survey that's done on a rolling basis, but that's only a survey of a sample of California's population. So we really need to see what the story that the numbers are going to tell us about, where Latinos have moved, where growth has been in the Latino community, where we might have lost population. Certainly there's areas like downtown LA, or areas east of LA that we're going to still be looking at carefully. Certainly, we're going to be looking at the population trends in the Central Valley, in Orange County, in San Diego, in the Inland Empire, in the Central Valley, in the coastal areas, the tri-county coastal areas. So those are all areas that we're going to be looking at. But we really want to see the data to see what's happening with those population trends and what that means for drawing Voting Rights Act compliant districts.
Question 7, approximately how long between when census data is delivered to California and when districts are given to local governments?
Well, again, typically if the census data had been delivered in March, we would have seen that data get to election officials by the middle of August. If census data had been delivered by the end of July, we would have seen those lines get to election officials by mid-December. That's actually one deadline that was being used when we thought we would have our redistricting data in July. Now, like I said, we are really going to have to work with election officials and work with the commission then to see what do these deadlines look like in a way that works for everybody.
Thank you. Next question. What if elected officials disagree with the new boundaries of the commission? How is this resolved and can they sue the commissioners?
So basically the commission can be sued, but it has to be on the grounds that the commission, this is a little oversimplified, but basically has to be on the grounds that the commission violated the criteria for drawing maps, or they did not follow the procedures set out in California law for drawing the maps. So those are the types of things that would subject the commission to suit.
Okay, we have more questions incoming. When can we expect the workshops to start?
So optimistically, we're probably for the workshops where we're really going to work with communities of interest, probably April or May. We're going to be, again, identifying where it is specifically we want to work in the state. But we're also ready, we're very open right now. If you're interested in being a partner, to please let us know if you're interested, because we can already start talking to you about that.
Next question. You've mentioned technical assistance. Is that for map drawing to support grassroots groups?
So we as an organization are not going to provide technical assistance on district maps. What we're going to provide technical assistance on is drawing maps of communities of interest. We have colleagues, voting rights experts, who will be submitting draft maps that draw district lines based on compliance with the Voting Rights Act. And what we want to make sure is the information that we collect about communities of interest get incorporated into maps that comply with the Voting Rights Act. But we at NALEO will not be drawing or providing technical assistance on maps that comply with the Voting Rights Act.
Question 11. Philanthropy was very engaged in census. How can they engage in redistricting process?
Well, I think there is an opportunity to invest. You know, for example, funders have formed a collaborative called the Fair Representation Fund. And that is certainly an opportunity. And again, you know, if you want to follow up with us, we can connect you with the people who are working with that fund. Also, I think it's very important that philanthropy, you know, helps just spread the word generally, right? Philanthropists are seen as very big leaders on so many civic engagement issues in California. So to continue to educate civic leaders about why redistricting is important, why it's the next step and the very important step after the census, that's another important role for philanthropic organizations.
Next question, is it important to find a good racial and socioeconomic balance of people in each district?
So for districts, there are like I said, there are two very important criteria that essentially incorporate those factors that you mentioned. One is having a composition of underrepresented groups that, if you can draw a district that complies with the Voting Rights Act or is required by the Voting Rights Act to allow those groups, those factors that you mentioned, to allow those to be taken into account when when creating the district so people can choose the candidates of their choice. Compliance with the Voting Rights Act is one of the things that takes those factors in. Another thing is keeping communities of interest together, because communities of interest are defined by people who share commonalities. Now, that may mean that sort of the traditional notion of diversity may not be the same from district to district, because some of the people who share the same economic interests, language, history, may not give you the kind of diversity that people typically think of. But we can again tell you that, you know, we are very committed overall for California that the maps allow diverse communities a fair opportunity to have their voices heard. So that if you're a Californian and you're, you know, you want to choose someone who's accountable to you and you're from a diverse community, those lines give you that fair opportunity.
Okay, we have more incoming questions. Is there a place where we can see existing communities of interest?
There is not one place where you could, there are a lot of testimonies submitted by communities of interest, about communities of interest. But interestingly, the commission in 2011 was required, and then this commission will be required also to provide a comprehensive report that really talks about and justifies how every single district they drew complied with all of the different factors. And there's some great information about communities of interest in that report. And again, if you follow up with us, we can help you get a copy of that report.
Okay, it is 3 p.m., almost 3 p.m. We probably have time for a couple more. The next question is, are these redistricting issues relatable to city redistricting challenges or when cities refuse to district themselves?
So I think there's two separate issues, right? If a city already has districts, yes, things like compliance with the Voting Rights Act, communities of interest, that is all very relatable to city redistricting. But I think it's also important, if a city has districts and it's going through the redistricting process, to learn about what are the special requirements and rules about the redistricting for that city and who is doing that redistricting. Now, if you have a city that or county where all of the council members or the board of supervisors are elected at large, you don't have districts. California has its own Voting Rights Act. It's called the CVRA, or the California Voting Rights Act. And that allows suits to be brought against localities if at-large district systems essentially discriminate against Latinos or other underrepresented groups. So that's a separate issue. It has, again, there's a separate law and a separate set of criteria that determine whether a California Voting Rights Act challenge can be brought. Now, if a challenge is successful and the decision is made that the county or the city is going to be doing redistricting, in other words, it will be doing elections by district instead of at large, then everything that we've talked about redistricting apply to the first redistricting or the first districting of that locality and future redistrictings.
Thank you, Rosalind. I think time check, we are maxed out our time. I think we have a couple of more questions that we are happy to email and send them to the group. It is 3:01.
Great. Well, I just want to thank my colleagues and turn this over to them. Our State Director of Civic Engagement Policy, Jacqueline Coto, and our California Redistricting Program Manager, Giovanni Hernandez. And I also want to thank the person behind the scenes, Rodrigo Armenta, who has helped us with all of the technical work on this. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and say thank you so much again, and we hope you can join us.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon again. My name is Jacqueline Coto. I'm the State Director of Civic Engagement Policy for Naleo Educational Fund, and I want to thank each and every one of you for showing up here today. It's been really exciting to see your engagement, to see your level of interest in the important work on redistricting. And I'm truly looking forward to further partnering and engaging with you directly in the near future, hopefully in person when available for our upcoming workshops. I want to thank everyone that showed up again, our commissioners, thank you for being here, and for the Naleo team as well. Thank you, Rosalind, for the great presentation. And I will briefly now send it over to Giovanni Hernandez, my colleague, for final comments and the conclusion of our webinar today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Jackie. Once again, my name is Giovanni Hernandez, and I'm the California Redistricting Program Manager with Naleo Educational Fund. Thank you all so much for joining us today to learn about how the California Citizens Redistricting Commission will conduct redistricting in the state, how community members can get involved, and about our efforts in the redistricting process. I'd also like to once again express gratitude to our guest commissioners for their service on the commission and their time today. As alluded to in today's main presentation, Naleo Educational Fund will be providing support to Latino community members through our series of workshops where we are going to provide basic education about the redistricting process and training to organizations and community leaders on how to provide adequate testimony to the California Citizens Redistricting Commission to ensure Latinos participate in the redistricting process and to guarantee the commission has sufficient testimony from the Latino community. We will be doing that work in both English and Spanish. So stay tuned for the future, in the future for Spanish trainings and workshops. By participating, we define our communities rather than let others define who we are. We look forward to partnering with all of our partners from diverse communities and to educate and mobilize the Latino community to participate in the redistricting process. Please reach out to us with any questions and opportunities to partner. Que pasen buenas tardes. Have a great day.